The evening air hung heavy on County Road 35, carrying the sweet scent of September hay and the distant rumble of thunder. 16-year-old Rebecca Hamilton checked her watch. 6:42 p.m. Darkness was falling faster than expected. She quickened her pace, adjusting the strap of her bag filled with groceries from Morrison's general store. The familiar 2-mile walk home had never felt so long. A car approached from behind, its headlights stretching her shadow across the gravel shoulder. Rebecca turned slightly, perhaps recognizing the vehicle. Then, in an instant that would haunt Galesburg, Michigan for generations, she vanished. No screams, no struggle, just absence where a vibrant teenage girl had stood moments before. For 41 years, that September evening in 1978 remained frozen in time, a community's open wound that refused to heal. Search parties disbanded, leads went nowhere, hope dimmed to a flicker, until 2019, when a voice long silenced finally spoke. "We have a DNA match." 4 words that shattered 4 decades of mystery. 4 words that would upend not just the investigation, but the very foundation of trust in this tight-knit farming community. Because the man whose genetic code was found preserved on evidence locked away since 1978 wasn't some drifter or known criminal. He was Harold Jenkins, the 68-year-old owner of Jenkins Hardware on Main Street, former church deacon, Little League coach, the man who'd helped organize the original search parties for Rebecca, the man who'd stood beside her parents at annual remembrance vigils, offering tissues for their tears. The revelation would fracture Galesburg along fault lines of loyalty, memory, and disbelief. How could someone hide such darkness behind a lifetime of respected service? How many lives would collapse under the weight of this terrible truth? Before we dive deeper into this shocking case that proves evil sometimes wears the most trusted faces in town, take a moment to hit subscribe. If you're fascinated by how modern science is finally solving decades-old mysteries and bringing unexpected justice, you won't want to miss our upcoming investigations. Rebecca Lynn Hamilton was the kind of teenager who filled rooms with energy. At 16, she stood tall at 5'8", with auburn hair that caught the sunlight in ways that made photography her favorite hobby. Her bedroom walls in the modest 2-story farmhouse on Wentworth Lane displayed her passions in Polaroid form. Horses at the county fair, sunsets over Gull Lake, and countless candid shots of her younger brothers caught mid-laugh. Becca never walked anywhere. She bounced. Her mother Margaret would later tell investigators, her voice breaking during those early interviews. She had this way of making everyone feel special, like whatever you were saying was the most important thing she'd ever heard. In September 1978, Rebecca was beginning her junior year at Galesburg Augusta High School with plans that stretched far beyond Kalamazoo County. Her diary, discovered untouched on her desk after her disappearance, detailed dreams of studying photojournalism at Michigan State University. She'd been saving babysitting money in a coffee tin labeled NYC Fund, determined to someday capture life in a city that existed for her only in magazines and movies. Her English teacher, Diane Lawson, described Rebecca as thoughtful but never shy, the student who asked questions others were afraid to voice. Rebecca wrote for the school newspaper, played clarinet in the marching band, and somehow still maintained straight A's. That girl, her father Thomas would say, never wasted a minute of daylight. Thursday, September 14, 1978, began like any other school day. Rebecca's alarm clock rang at 6:15 a.m. Her mother recalled hearing the shower running at 6:20 and the familiar creak of the third stair at 6:45 as Rebecca came down for breakfast. She had toast with strawberry jam. Margaret Hamilton testified. She was excited because they were announcing yearbook committee assignments that day. Rebecca left for school at 7:10 a.m., walking with her neighbor Susan Fletcher to catch the bus at the corner. School records confirm Rebecca attended all classes that day. Susan recalled Rebecca being especially happy at lunch because she'd been named photography editor for the yearbook. After final bell, Rebecca stayed for a brief yearbook committee meeting that ended at 4:15 p.m. Instead of taking the late bus home, Rebecca told Susan she needed to pick up groceries for her mother. Mom had the flu, and Rebecca promised to get soup and ginger ale, Thomas Hamilton explained. That's why she walked to Morrison's instead of coming straight home. Security camera footage from Morrison's general store, grainy but preserved as evidence, shows Rebecca entering at 5:37 p.m. She spent 23 minutes shopping, paying cashier Donna Meeks with exact change at 6 p.m. The receipt listed Campbell's chicken noodle soup, 3 cans, Canada dry ginger ale, 2 bottles, bread, milk, and a Hershey's chocolate bar that Margaret later noted was probably her treat for doing the errand. Rebecca exited Morrison's at 6:03 p.m., captured one final time on camera as she adjusted her blue windbreaker against the cooling evening air. The walk home should have taken approximately 35-40 minutes. The Hamilton residence was 1.8 miles from the store, along County Road 35, a 2-lane rural route with sporadic farmhouses and cornfields stretching between. At 6:52 p.m., Margaret Hamilton, concerned about the approaching storm, called the store. Donna confirmed Rebecca had left nearly an hour earlier. By 7:15, with thunder cracking overhead and no sign of their daughter, Thomas began driving the route between their home and the store. At 7:43 p.m., he found her grocery bag scattered across the shoulder of County Road 35, approximately 1.2 miles from Morrison's. The milk carton had burst open, creating a white puddle already diluting in the rain. The chocolate bar remained untouched in its wrapper. Rebecca's denim shoulder bag lay nearby, nothing missing. Her house key, $342 and change, and her Kodak Instamatic camera all accounted for. But Rebecca was gone. What happened in that ordinary moment as dusk settled over those familiar fields? Did she recognize the driver of the approaching car, or was she caught completely unaware? Did she fight? Did she call out? The cornfield stood tall that September, ready for harvest. Silent witnesses to whatever transpired in those crucial moments. The most haunting detail emerged days later, when investigators recovered a single undeveloped photo from Rebecca's camera. The final image she captured, the partial license plate of a blue pickup truck, the photo apparently taken from hip level as if snapped discreetly. Was this a teenager's random photography practice, or had some instinct prompted her to document something that made her uneasy? For 41 years, that question tormented everyone who loved Rebecca Hamilton. So here's a question for all of you watching today. Where are you watching from? Have you ever lived in a small town where everyone knows everyone? Where the cashier at the general store asks about your mom's flu without being told she's sick? In communities like Galesburg, secrets have nowhere to hide, or so everyone believed until Rebecca's case exposed the darkness lurking beneath the surface of small-town familiarity. By midnight on September 14th, the rain had turned County Road 35 into a muddy obstacle course for the dozen police officers and volunteer firefighters who formed the first search party. Sheriff Raymond Collins arrived personally to oversee operations, bringing spotlights borrowed from the high school football field. They combed through cornfields and drainage ditches until 4 a.m., when the downpour made further efforts impossible. "We knew those first 24 hours were critical," Collins later told reporters. "But the storm washed away footprints, tire tracks. Evidence we'll never recover." Dawn broke on September 15th with 50 volunteers assembled in the Morrison's general store parking lot. Thomas Hamilton, his voice hoarse from calling his daughter's name through the night, addressed the crowd. "Rebecca is smart. She's strong. She'd fight. She'd run. Something happened that prevented her from coming home." The search expanded to 5 square miles. Volunteer pilots from Kalamazoo Airport conducted aerial sweeps. State police brought tracking dogs that followed Rebecca's scent from the scattered groceries to a spot 100 yards east, where the trail abruptly ended, suggesting she'd been placed in a vehicle. By noon, investigators had established a command center at Galesburg Fire Station. Sergeant Patricia Delano was assigned as lead detective, only the second female detective in department history. Her initial report noted, "Witness statements contain troubling inconsistencies that suggest either confusion or deliberate misdirection." These inconsistencies centered around 3 key witnesses. Donna Meeks, the Morrison's cashier, initially stated Rebecca left alone at 6:03 p.m. In her second interview, she mentioned Harold Jenkins was leaving as Rebecca was paying. They exchanged hellos. When asked why she omitted this detail, Meeks appeared flustered. "I didn't think it mattered. Mr. Jenkins shops here all the time." Frank Whitaker, a farmer returning from delivering corn to the grain elevator, reported seeing Rebecca walking alone at approximately 6:20 p.m., about half a mile from Morrison's. She was moving at a normal pace, not hurried, didn't seem distressed. Yet Whitaker's wife, who was in the passenger seat, couldn't corroborate the sighting, claiming she was dozing during that stretch of road. Most perplexing was Leah Turnbull's testimony. The 72-year-old lived in a farmhouse directly across from where Rebecca's belongings were found. She reported hearing a short, sharp scream around 6:40 p.m., but when she looked out her window, she saw nothing unusual, just a blue pickup slowing down, probably because of the storm. When shown the partial license plate from Rebecca's final photograph, Turnbull couldn't confirm if it matched the truck she'd seen. "My eyes aren't what they used to be," she admitted. The blue pickup became the investigation's first solid lead. On September 16th, officers began documenting every blue pickup in Kalamazoo County, a staggering 212 vehicles. They also discovered that Harold Jenkins, the hardware store owner who had allegedly crossed paths with Rebecca at Morrison's, drove a blue 1972 Ford F-100. When questioned, Jenkins confirmed seeing Rebecca at the store but stated he drove directly to a church board meeting afterward. 5 church elders verified his presence from 6:30 p.m. until 8:15 p.m. His pickup was examined and returned within hours, one of dozens cleared in those initial days. On the evening of September 16th, the Hamiltons made their first television appeal. Local station WWMT broadcast Margaret's tear-stained face into living rooms across Michigan. "Someone took our daughter. Someone knows where she is. Please, if you know anything at all, call the police. We just want her home." The station received 157 tips that night. Officers followed up on each one. They interviewed Rebecca's ex-boyfriend, who had an airtight alibi, football practice with 30 witnesses. They questioned known sex offenders within a 50-mile radius. They searched abandoned farms, wells, and hunting cabins. Nothing. By September 18th, 4 days after Rebecca's disappearance, the search parties had dwindled. National media arrived but quickly departed when a child abduction in Chicago diverted attention. Sheriff Collins requested assistance from the Michigan State Police, who assigned 2 additional detectives but reached the same impasses. For the residents of Galesburg, the lack of answers bred something insidious: fear. Parents began driving children to bus stops. The hardware store sold out of deadbolts and window locks. Morrison's general store installed additional outdoor lighting and offered escorts to customers' cars. "This isn't a community that locks its doors," Reverend Michael Simmons told his congregation that Sunday. "But evil has visited us, and we don't know where it's hiding." What the community didn't know, couldn't have imagined, was that evil wasn't hiding at all. It was standing beside them in church pews, attending town meetings about improved safety measures, and even volunteering for search parties. Looking at the evidence we've covered so far, the scattered groceries, the abrupt end to the scent trail, the mysterious blue pickup, and that final photograph Rebecca took, what do you think happened on County Road 35 that September evening? The truth would remain buried for 41 years, but the clues were already there, hidden in plain sight. By December 1978, Rebecca Hamilton's face no longer appeared on the evening news. The missing posters that once papered every storefront in Galesburg had weathered, their edges curling inward, her smile fading under Michigan's winter sun. The investigation that once commanded 20 officers had dwindled to a single filing cabinet in Detective Delano's office, a case officially labeled open but inactive. "It's like she evaporated," Thomas Hamilton told the Kalamazoo Gazette in their one-year retrospective piece buried on page 7. But someone knows. Someone has carried this secret for a year now. The Hamiltons refused to say murder or kidnapping, always disappearance. They maintained Rebecca's bedroom exactly as she left it that Thursday morning, homework still open on her desk, a half-read copy of The Great Gatsby, dog-eared on page 87. Margaret dusted it weekly, as if her daughter might return any moment to complain about someone touching her things. Through the early 1980s, the case surfaced sporadically. When similar disappearances occurred in neighboring counties, investigators would briefly revisit Rebecca's file, looking for connections that never materialized. A prison inmate in Jackson claimed knowledge of her whereabouts in 1982, but the confession proved false, a ploy for reduced sentencing. Each false lead is like losing her again. Margaret confessed to her sister in a letter dated 1983, found later among family papers. But not knowing is worse than any truth could be. By the 5th anniversary in 1983, Rebecca would have been 21, a college graduate perhaps, starting her career in photojournalism. Instead, her high school graduating class left an empty chair at their ceremony, draped with her marching band jacket. That same year, Thomas Hamilton established the Rebecca Hamilton Memorial Scholarship for aspiring photographers. The first fundraiser, a spaghetti dinner at the Galesburg fire station, drew over 300 attendees. Harold Jenkins donated supplies from his hardware store and served as master of ceremonies. Rebecca's spirit lives on through the talents she'll help nurture in others, Jenkins said from the podium, his voice catching with what attendees described as profound emotion. Though I only knew her as a customer, her story has touched us all. In 1988, 10 years after Rebecca vanished, interest briefly resurged when Detective Patricia Delano, now promoted to captain, reopened the case with new forensic techniques. Evidence preserved in 1978, Rebecca's scattered belongings, soil samples from the roadside, underwent examination unavailable a decade earlier. Results proved inconclusive, though Delano noted in her supplemental report. Degraded blood evidence on victim's bag suggests blunt force trauma occurred at abduction site. The Hamiltons never missed a September 14th vigil, gathering at dusk on County Road 35 where the groceries were found. What began as hundreds of supporters dwindled to dozens, then family and close friends. Through rain, snow, or perfect autumn evenings mirroring the night she disappeared, they stood with candles and photographs, keeping Rebecca's memory illuminated against time's darkening effect. Margaret began a tradition of reading from Rebecca's diary each year, sharing the voice of a teenager frozen in 1978, while the world aged around her words. "When I get my driver's license next month, I'm going to drive to Lake Michigan just to watch the sunset," she'd written 2 weeks before vanishing. "Mom says I'm dramatic, but I think some moments deserve witnessing." Thomas died in 1996 without answers. A heart attack at 54 that his doctor attributed to 18 years of unresolved grief. Margaret soldiered on, establishing one of Michigan's first support groups for families of missing persons. The 25th anniversary in 2003 brought renewed media attention. Colder Case Files, a popular true crime program, featured Rebecca's disappearance, prompting a flurry of tips, all leading nowhere. A psychic from Grand Rapids claimed Rebecca was buried beneath a red barn, near water and evergreens, a description vague enough to match dozens of properties that police lacked resources to search. Throughout these decades, Harold Jenkins remained a pillar of community support. His hardware store sponsored the annual scholarship fundraiser. He attended every vigil, often bringing coffee and blankets for the family. When the police station needed renovation in 2005, Jenkins Hardware supplied materials at cost and volunteered labor for the evidence room's expansion, a contribution that earned him a mayoral commendation. What no one realized, the evidence that would eventually expose him sat in that very room, waiting for science to advance enough to tell its story. This investigation took unexpected turns that no one in Galesburg could have predicted. Like this video and subscribe to follow more true crime cases that defied expectations, cases where answers came from places no one thought to look, and where justice arrived decades after hope seemed lost. November 2017 began unremarkably in Galesburg. Margaret Hamilton, now 76, walked with a cane to place flowers at the roadside memorial that marked the spot where her daughter's belongings were found 39 years earlier. What she didn't know was that 180 miles away in Lansing, a forensic revolution was about to rewrite her family's tragedy. The Michigan State Police had just received a $2.7 million federal grant to establish a cold case DNA unit, specifically targeting unsolved cases from before 1990. Lieutenant Sofia Ramirez, the unit's director, began by reviewing 211 case files that might benefit from advanced testing. Rebecca Hamilton's disappearance stood out immediately, Ramirez explained in later court testimony. The evidence had been meticulously preserved, and there were multiple untested samples that predated standard DNA collection protocols. The original investigation had collected fingernail scrapings from Rebecca's abandoned shoulder bag, preserved but never tested because DNA technology didn't exist in 1978. They'd also saved fibers from her windbreaker, found caught on roadside brush near her scattered belongings. Most promising was a microscope slide containing what appeared to be a skin cell sample, taken from the strap of Rebecca's bag, where it had apparently been forcibly removed from her shoulder. These samples sat in evidence for nearly 4 decades, Ramirez noted, waiting for science to catch up to them. The breakthrough came through a process called massively parallel sequencing, a technique that allows forensic scientists to develop DNA profiles from samples once considered too degraded or microscopic for testing. Unlike conventional methods requiring relatively large samples, this technology could extract genetic information from just a few cells. In January 2018, Dr. Marcus Whitman, the lab's director, called Ramirez with news that initially seemed disappointing. "We have a male DNA profile from the bag strap, but it's not in CODIS." The combined DNA index system contained profiles of known offenders. But this DNA belonged to someone who'd never been arrested or convicted of a crime requiring DNA collection. Undeterred, Ramirez authorized the next step: forensic genetic genealogy, the same technique that had recently identified the Golden State Killer in California. This controversial approach involved uploading the DNA profile to commercial genealogy databases, searching for family matches rather than the suspect himself. "Think of it like creating a family tree in reverse," Dr. Whitman explained. "We find distant cousins, then work inward toward our unknown subject." By March 2018, they'd narrowed possibilities to 3 families in southwestern Michigan. The lab then began the painstaking process of elimination, discreetly collecting discarded DNA samples, cigarette butts, coffee cups, even sweat from gym equipment, from potential suspects without alerting them to the investigation. On June 7, 2018, Detective James Morales was having lunch at Jenkins Hardware's annual community barbecue when Harold Jenkins personally handed him a napkin and bottle of water. After Jenkins walked away, Morales carefully folded the napkin into an evidence bag hidden in his jacket pocket. 3 days later, the lab called with results that left the detective speechless. The DNA on Rebecca's bag matched Harold Jenkins with a probability of 99.9998%. "I remember sitting down right there in the hallway," Morales recounted. This man had been at every vigil. He'd served food at the scholarship fundraisers. He'd helped build the evidence room where we kept the samples that would ultimately expose him. Before making an arrest, investigators needed more. They obtained a warrant to place Jenkins under surveillance, collecting additional DNA samples from his trash and restaurant visits, all confirming the initial match. They also discovered something extraordinary when reviewing old case files. Harold Jenkins's blue Ford pickup had been cleared too quickly in 1978. The partial license plate in Rebecca's final photograph had been initially interpreted as JE7, but modern digital enhancement revealed it was actually HE7, the first characters on Jenkins's vanity plate he seven'd wear, promoting his store. Most damning was Detective Delano's original interview notes from 1978, buried in the file. She'd written, "Subject appeared nervous when discussing his whereabouts. Claims church meeting started 6:30, but secretary's log shows meeting delayed until 7 brown. Unexplained 30-minute gap requires follow-up." That follow-up never occurred after church elders insisted Jenkins was present at 6:30 for pre-meeting prayer. Margaret Hamilton was summoned to the sheriff's office on October 12, 2018. When told about the DNA match, she reportedly whispered, "Harold? Our Harold?" before collapsing into a chair. The man who had held her hand through 40 years of grief had been the source of it all. For investigators, the most unsettling revelation was yet to come. What they discovered in Jenkins' basement during the execution of their search warrant would answer the question that had haunted Galesburg since 1978. What happened to Rebecca Hamilton? What time is it where you're watching? Late-night crime story sessions hit different, especially when they reveal how someone could hide in plain sight for decades, attending vigils for a victim whose fate only they knew. The darkness outside your window right now might mirror the darkness investigators uncovered in Harold Jenkins's seemingly ordinary life. Harold Edward Jenkins presented the quintessential small-town success story. Born and raised in Galesburg, he'd taken over his father's struggling hardware store in 1972 and transformed it into the commercial heart of Main Street. At 68, his salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses completed the image of the reliable, trustworthy businessman who remembered every customer's name and their preferred brand of paint. "Mr. Jenkins gave me my first job at 16, said Michael Donovan, now 42. He taught half the men in town how to change a faucet or hang drywall. Sunday school teacher, Little League coach, Chamber of Commerce president, he was Galesburg. The hardware store's walls displayed decades of community service awards. Jenkins had been Grand Marshal of the Memorial Day Parade 7 times. His annual 4th of July barbecue raised thousands for the volunteer fire department. When floods devastated downtown in 1986, Jenkins Hardware provided free supplies for rebuilding and remained open 24 hours until every home had electricity restored. His personal life seemed equally admirable. He'd married Elaine Crawford in 1981, 3 years after Rebecca's disappearance. They raised 2 adopted daughters now living in Chicago and Denver. While not wealthy, the couple lived comfortably in a restored Victorian home 6 blocks from the hardware store, hosting Christmas caroling parties and sponsoring an annual scholarship. What investigators uncovered beneath this carefully constructed facade shattered every assumption. Court records revealed that in 1970, while attending Western Michigan University, Jenkins had been questioned regarding a female student's assault complaint. The case was dropped when the victim left school suddenly. In 1975, a teenage female employee at Jenkins Hardware quit after what store records listed as a workplace misunderstanding. Neither incident resulted in charges. Most disturbing was Jenkins's obsessive documentation. During their search, police discovered a hidden room behind his basement workshop. Inside, a filing cabinet contained 40 years of newspaper clippings about Rebecca's case, far beyond casual interest. Photographs of subsequent vigils showed Jenkins standing progressively closer to Margaret Hamilton through the decades, eventually becoming her regular companion and supporter. He didn't just hide his crime. Prosecutor Andrea Lawson would later argue in court. He inserted himself into its aftermath, watching grief he had caused unfold like some perverse theater. Forensic accounting revealed another pattern. Jenkins made annual cash donations to the Rebecca Hamilton Scholarship Fund, exactly matching the amount in Rebecca's savings account at the time of her disappearance, $1,142 each year for 40 years. When questioned about this specific amount, Jenkins allegedly replied, "I owed her that much at least." On November 7, 2018 at 9:17 a.m., Detective Morales entered Jenkins Hardware with 4 officers. Security cameras captured the moment, Jenkins helping an elderly customer select weather stripping when Morales approached the counter. "Harold Jenkins, we have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the abduction and murder of Rebecca Hamilton," Morales announced, loud enough for the 6 customers and 3 employees present to hear clearly. Store footage shows Jenkins' expression shifting from confusion to resignation in seconds. He carefully removed his store apron, folded it, and placed it on the counter before extending his wrists for handcuffs. "I think Margaret always knew it was me," he said, his only comment before requesting an attorney. News of the arrest spread through Galesburg with unprecedented speed. By noon, every local and regional news outlet had crews stationed outside the sheriff's office. Customers who had been inside Jenkins Hardware during the arrest posted videos that went viral nationally within hours. The community's reaction transcended shock. manifesting as collective trauma. Longtime customers gathered outside the now-closed hardware store, some leaving flowers as if mourning the death of the man they thought they knew. Others expressed anger, with several residents vandalizing the storefront overnight, something virtually unheard of in Galesburg. "I bought my first home toolkit from Harold," said retired teacher Susan Brennan, 70. "He helped plan my husband's funeral reception. To learn he's responsible for Rebecca's disappearance, it makes you question everything and everyone." The betrayal cut deepest for those who had allowed Jenkins into their grief. Rebecca's high school friends, now middle-aged parents themselves, had accepted consolation from the man who caused their pain. The volunteer firefighters who searched cornfields alongside Jenkins now realized he knew exactly where not to look. Pastor Robert Wilson, who had provided Jenkins's alibi for decades, suffered a minor stroke 2 days after the arrest. From his hospital bed, he issued a statement. "Evil wears many masks, including righteousness. Our church family harbored a predator while comforting his victims. May God forgive us all." Perhaps most heartbreaking was Margaret Hamilton's response. When reporters asked how she felt about Jenkins's arrest, she replied simply, "He brought me coffee every September 14th for 40 years, standing beside me where he left my daughter's things." How do you measure that kind of cruelty? The arrest exposed fault lines in how communities process betrayal. While many expressed vindication at finally having answers, others struggled with cognitive dissonance, unable to reconcile the Harold they knew with the monster revealed by DNA. Stories like this remind us appearances can deceive. The neighbor who shovels your sidewalk, the businessman who sponsors local sports teams, our trust is often based on carefully curated public personas. Share this video with someone who appreciates the complexity of human nature and understands that sometimes the darkest secrets hide behind the brightest smiles in town. Harold Jenkins' trial began on April 15, 2019, at the Kalamazoo County Courthouse. The small town of Galesburg virtually shut down as residents packed the gallery, overflow rooms, and courthouse steps. For 6 consecutive days, live news feeds broadcast what many called Michigan's trial of the century. Prosecutor Andrea Lawson presented a meticulous timeline constructed through both modern forensics and resurrected evidence from 1978. The basement of Jenkins' Victorian home had yielded Rebecca's student ID and several photographs from her camera, trophies kept for 4 decades. Soil analysis matched dirt from Jenkins' property to samples preserved from Rebecca's shoes. Phone records revealed he had called the Hamilton home repeatedly in the days following her disappearance, ostensibly to check on search progress. The prosecution's most powerful evidence came from Rebecca's remains, discovered buried beneath the concrete floor of an old storage shed behind Jenkins' hardware, poured just days after her disappearance. DNA confirmed her identity, while forensic anthropology revealed defensive fractures to her wrists and fingers. Rebecca fought her attacker. Medical examiner Dr. Eliza Thornton testified. The injuries indicate she defended herself vigorously until the final moments. During cross-examination, Jenkins' defense team attempted to portray him as a community pillar with no violent history, suggesting evidence contamination over the decades. This strategy collapsed when 3 women came forward with accounts of disturbing encounters with Jenkins dating back to 1969, none previously reported due to his standing in the community. On the trial's 4th day, Jenkins shocked the courtroom by dismissing his attorneys and changing his plea to guilty. In a monotone voice, he confessed to encountering Rebecca on County Road 35, offering her a ride as the storm approached. When she refused, citing her parents' warnings about accepting rides, he described becoming irrationally angry at her rejection. His clinical description of what followed left several jurors in tears, and Margaret Hamilton had to be escorted from the courtroom. "I never meant to become part of the investigation," Jenkins stated. "But once I was there, watching their pain became an addiction. Every vigil, every fundraiser, their suffering made me feel powerful. I could cause it and then appear to soothe it." On May 3, 2019, Judge Eleanor Simmons sentenced Harold Jenkins to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Before delivering the sentence, she addressed him directly. For 40 years, you watched a family drown in grief that you caused. Your performative compassion compounds your crime beyond measure. For the Hamilton family, the conviction brought answers but complicated closure. Rebecca's younger brother, Thomas Jr., now 54, spoke at a press conference. We accepted comfort from our sister's killer. We welcomed him into our grief. That realization haunts us as much as her absence. Margaret, now the only surviving parent, visited Rebecca's newly discovered remains before burial. I finally told her the truth, she shared with victim advocates. I told her we never stopped searching, never stopped loving her, that her life mattered enough for justice to find its way, even decades later. For Galesburg residents, Jenkins' conviction forced a painful collective reckoning. The hardware store that had served as a community hub for generations was permanently closed, eventually renovated into a youth center named after Rebecca. Former employees and friends of Jenkins formed support groups to process their complex emotions, betrayal, guilt, and the disorienting realization that they never truly knew the man they'd respected. We're all questioning our judgment now, said Reverend Wilson at a community healing service. How many handshakes, conversations, and shared meals with someone who harbored such darkness? It tests your faith in humanity. Beyond Galesburg, the case highlighted the revolutionary impact of forensic genetic genealogy on cold cases nationwide. In the year following Jenkins' conviction, 17 unsolved murders and disappearances from the 1970s and 80s were resolved using similar techniques. The Michigan State Police Cold Case Unit received funding for 10 additional investigators, with Rebecca's case cited as the primary justification. Detective Morales, who collected the DNA sample that cracked the case, now leads training sessions for law enforcement across the country. DNA doesn't forget and it doesn't lie, he tells recruits. A killer might escape justice for decades, but science is patient. Time is no longer on their side. How would you feel if someone you respected for decades was revealed to be hiding such a dark secret? The residents of Galesburg continue wrestling with this question, examining photographs where they stand smiling beside Harold Jenkins at community events, wondering if they should have somehow sensed the evil behind the friendly hardware store owner's familiar smile. On September 14, 2020, 42 years to the day since Rebecca Hamilton vanished, Galesburg unveiled a memorial garden where Morrison's general store once stood. At its center stands a bronze statue of a young woman with a camera, capturing life through a lens forever frozen in 1978. The plaque reads simply, Rebecca Lynn Hamilton. Her story continues to bring truth to light. Each year, students who receive the Rebecca Hamilton Memorial Scholarship now participate in a documentary photography project focused on cold case awareness. Their work has been exhibited in galleries across Michigan, transforming one family's tragedy into a movement that has helped identify remains in 3 previously unsolved disappearances. Margaret Hamilton, now approaching 80, speaks regularly at forensic science conferences. Justice delayed is still justice, she tells audiences of investigators and lab technicians. My daughter waited 41 years to tell us what happened to her, but science finally gave her a voice. The basement room where investigators once stored Rebecca's evidence has been transformed into the Hamilton Cold Case Laboratory, a state-of-the-art facility where genetic genealogists and forensic scientists collaborate on unsolved crimes. Its walls display photographs of missing persons whose families still wait for answers, a visual reminder of the human stories behind each case number. Detective Morales perhaps best summarized Rebecca's legacy during an interview marking the 1-year anniversary of Jenkins' conviction. Rebecca Hamilton was silenced at 16, but her case now speaks for victims who've waited decades for truth. The message to perpetrators is clear. There's no statute of limitations on DNA, no expiration date on evidence properly preserved. Science evolves, and secrets hidden for generations can be exposed with a single cell. For the thousands of American families still waiting for answers about missing loved ones, Rebecca's case offers something precious, tangible hope. Every cold case solved through forensic genealogy validates their refusal to forget, to move on, to accept mystery as the final chapter. As for Harold Jenkins, the man who murdered a teenager and then spent 40 years embedding himself in her family's grief, he serves his life sentence in isolation, his name fading from Galesburg's memory even as Rebecca's grows more vibrant with time. Her story reminds us that justice has no timetable, that evidence whispers truth across decades, that science can bridge the gap between what was lost and what can still be found. For more stories about cold cases solved through forensic breakthroughs, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Because every unresolved disappearance deserves attention, every family deserves answers, and every victim deserves to have their final chapter written, no matter how many years it takes.